I'm just gonna put it out here, 2022 is legit one of the best years country music has ever seen. And not in a post-bro age is way better. Nah bro, even if you were to completely ignore that era, 2022 is stacked up as one of the best years country music has ever been. And there's a variety of reasons of why I think we've reached this point. Most of which were years in the making, while others have come out of the blue. And it's crazy to think about because 2021 was one of the worst years I've ever seen. I hated it. I cannot express it enough with how many awful, disappointing, and mid projects came out that year. So to have a turnaround on this massive of a scale is quite intriguing. Intriguing enough for me to feel warranted to explain this sudden shift in quality. Because if this year can truly stick the landing by the end of the fall release season, I think this year will not be a fluke and actually build upon a more structural future in the coming years. Starting with... As the title says, we're currently in an age that really doesn't have a driving sound or formula for success like years prior. I discussed this in my Luke Combs review and I wanted to go a bit more in depth. There's this thing most people call the Nashville Sound, and essentially it's the driving force of the country music industry, where most artists go off a specific formula of music and musical, lyrical, and even messaging. In the 80s it was classic pop fusion, 90s saw a bit more of a neo-traditional movement, and the very early 2000s was a bit of a nationalism phase led by artists like Toby Keith. The 2010s was pretty obvious. You had bro country, a genre everyone but teenage white boys who've never heard a substantive song in their life hate. And while it certainly had its hold over the years, it certainly wasn't as long as most other musical eras, as the Nashville Sound shifted into a more contemporary top 40 pop phase later on, an era so many people have gone on to complain about, including myself in many forms. Your amount of success at this time was crucial on whether or not your career adhered to the Nashville Sound formula. But as you may have noticed, there's been less and less of a recurring formula going on in the world of country right now. The closest thing you can pinpoint to it is a small handful of Morgan Wallen copycats, but that's about it. Nashville's sonic direction is in a weird flux phase where it has yet to be determined. The question is, what's gonna fill that void? There's a lot of country artists trying to create the next big sound that will define the next generation of country, and while it's most likely gonna be Wallen, it's still a fantastic time to be a country fan due to... Like I said, Nashville is currently split into factions due to the new formula having not been created yet, and this allows for artists en masse to start going for their own things with less of a risk of failure and success. The most obvious example being Ernest's single, Flower Shops, which in fairness is mostly due to Wallen's name being attached, but besides that, it's one of the most traditional country singles in recent memory, calling back to the more classic days of George Jones, and the fact that this is a top 20 single on radio right now goes to show that people will accept older styles and hallmarks to the past, and those ages aren't completely forgotten and worth giving up on. Ernest's album in general goes for a vibe of throwback, from a homage of some old George Strait to how steel-driven a lot of it is. And even when you're not going for a traditional vibe, experimentation is also thriving with the success of Miranda Lambert's Palomino, which is one of the rare triumphs of all country influences seeping its way into the mainstream under one of the most popular women in country history. It's certainly not going for a traditional vibe and does its own thing, culminating in a really good experience. Maren Morris's Humble Quest, while not particularly country, breathes its own vibe of authenticity in stark contrast to her other pop peers and even her own work. Hailey Whitter is going for a complete 180 in sound on her latest album Raised. Luke Combs continuing to refine and sharpen his sound in a lot of creative ways. Midland has been pushing their sonic direction in a new way as well. The Texas scene is being embraced more and more thanks to Cody Johnson and Randall King. Jon Pardi continuing to blaze his own trail with his old school Bakersfield. Pop country actually beginning to get stronger with Caitlin Smith and Kelsey Ballerini. Hell, even with albums I'm not even a fan of like Brett Eldred's Songs About You, at least it went for something different, which I can always respect. And then of course, there's Bronco, which is the crown jewel of unique sound, experimentation, and authenticity in context of 2022. Not only is what Orville doing completely unique and unlike anything to be found in the mainstream this year, it just so happens to be fantastically enjoyable. Like seriously, even if you found Pony to be a bit weird and not your thing, trust me, Bronco is nothing like that and a vast improvement in nearly every way. Every risk soars, the vocal performance is exceptional and unique. You won't be able to find any artist in the mainstream doing it like him. And frankly, that can apply to so many artists, even those of similar backgrounds. Even though Caitlin, Maren, and Kelsey are pop country, these certainly aren't copy and paste formulas, and each one goes for their own lens rather than the same one. It's truly incredible to have a new flavor with each passing listen and yet still identify these as great country music experiences, even when those influences are minute. To have Texas, contemporary, traditional, alternative, rock infused, and pop all circulating in the mainstream in a vast array is truly incredible. And I don't know about you, but I'd much rather have a completely different experience when listening to albums than having the same formula, even if it was good, done over and over. As much as I love years like 2015 and 2019 for their amount of quality, they definitely felt like they were operating off specific sounds and eras. Meanwhile, 2022 is nothing like that in the slightest. But a strong sonic direction isn't enough, of course. There's also... I've always been prone to prioritize lyrics over sound, and that's the case even now. While there's obviously some great writing on these releases this year, not one of them is as strong, let alone as popular, as the rising sensation that is Zach Bryan. Zach, while not as well rounded as some of the other albums this year, is truly leading the way for substance to be prioritized in country again with his incredible lyricism. Because even if you think there's somebody in Nashville doing it better than Zach, you can't deny his lyrical touch and sensitivity to the subjects he tackles absolutely outshines arguably a decade of the average release from a major label artist. And it doesn't just outshine other albums in quality, there's been many albums over the years that have done that. It's also the fact that what Zach is doing is selling. American Heartbreak is one of the top-selling country projects of 2022. And sure, you can pinpoint that to the fact just because it's 30 songs, but even if you cut its initial sales by half, this is an album that still outsold Thomas Rhett, Jason Aldean, and Carrie Underwood, three of the supposed biggest stars in the country music scene, all who released albums that adhere to the former Nashville formula they've operated by their entire careers. Albums with poor streams that have been completely forgotten about in discussion. Meanwhile, Zach Bryan's American Heartbreak has already cemented itself as a cultural classic in modern country. And it wasn't because of a major label pushing an album to radio or going for a media push like some other artists. He did it with a pen in his hand and heart on the paper. Something a lot of these guys haven't done a single time in their musical careers. And it's not just Zach who's embraced a stronger lyrical push. Miranda Lambert and her embracement of Texas songwriters like John Randall and Jack Ingram on both the Marfa tapes and Palomino made for one of the largest Texas-Nashville crossovers in recent memory. Even Maren Morris brought Natalie Hemby along for her album and really grounding it in a way Maren's other work really never was. Hailey Whitters provided a strong sense of setting on Raised. Midland's album was so well tied together in this as well, with his tropical themes meshing greatly with the entire vibe of the record. I don't even need to tell you that the Willie Nelson album was fantastic. He's well established himself as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Of course, A Beautiful Time would be stellar. Kelsea Ballerini continues to make albums more personal than the last. Even Luke Combs, at his tamest writing-wise, still turns out very wholesome experiences. We're on the verge of country as a collective scene becoming once more a genre seen as respectable, portraying a culture in a compelling manner, rather than just being a memeable joke. And keep in mind, we're only halfway through the year. We still have a John Party, Kelsea Ballerini, Randy Houser, Ashley McBryde, and a Brandy Clark album to come, and you can bet I'm extremely excited to hear those when they release. Only time will tell if we can keep this train of not just fantastic releases going, but keeping these values of encouragement and uniqueness and value in substance. I certainly hope we will, because at least for now, it's cool to be a country music fan again.